Creepshow is a 1982 horror anthology film directed by George A. Romero, who is best known for directing the Dead trilogy, which comprised of Night of the Living Dead in 1968, Dawn of the Dead in 1978, and Day of the Dead in 1985. The film was written by the legendary horror author Stephen King, who wrote The Shining, Misery, and Carrie, amongst many others. The film contains 5 short stories, and are bookended by a prologue and epilogue, featuring a young boy being punished by his father for reading horror comics. The film pays tribute to the horror comics of the 50s, including Tales from the Crypt and The Haunt of Fear. The first story is called Father's Day. It follows the Grantham family, who meet up at their estate for their annual dinner on the 3rd Sunday in June. Sylvia Grantham begins to talk to Bedelia about her late father, the domineering Nathan, who amassed his fortune through, amongst other things, fraud and bootlegging. Later, Bedelia stops by the local cemetery, and after a few swigs of whiskey, states that she and Sylvia murdered Nathan and staged it as an accident in order to collect his fortune and redistribute it to the rest of the family. In the midst of all this, she spills some of the whiskey on Nathan's grave, and after this, grisly events begin to occur. The second story is called The Lonesome Death of Geordie Vireel, which is based on a short story written by Stephen King. Geordie, played by King himself, sees a meteorite land near his farm. After initially touching the meteorite, which burns his fingers, he returns with a bucket and douses it with water. This causes it to crack open and reveal a blue glowing liquid located within. After his attempt to glue the 2 parts of the meteorite fails, he puts the liquid from the meteor under the soil. In the meantime, the liquid makes contact with his skin, and from there, things get out of hand. The next story is Something to Tide You Over. Richard Vickers visits a couple, Harry, who is having an affair with Richard's wife, and Harry's wife, Becky. After showing Harry a recording of Becky begging Harry to help her out at Richard's beachfront house, Richard then points to a burial mound in the sand on the beach, where Harry jumps into it. In the meantime, Richard pulls a gun and tells him to bury himself. After the burial is complete, leaving just Harry's head uncovered, Becky is shown in a similar situation further down the beach. Richard then sets up a TV camera to record Harry and then retreats to his home. The penultimate story is called The Crate, which is based on the short story written by Stephen King. At a prestigious university, a janitor drops a quarter under a staircase, and as he attempts to retrieve it, he notices a wooden crate marked "Shipped to Horlicks University via Julia Carpenter, Arctic Expedition, June 19, 1834. The janitor then calls a biology professor, Dexter Stanley, to inform him of the discovery. Dexter then helps the janitor to move the crate into a nearby lab. While attempting to open it, the janitor sticks his hand into the crate and begins screaming in pain. The crate then opens, revealing a shaggy-haired and sharp-fanged creature resembling an ape. The creature then devours the janitor, leaving only his boot behind. The situation then quickly begins to get out of hand. The final story is called The Creeping Up on You. Upson Pratt is a ruthless business mogul who has germophobia, and he lives in an apartment with electric locks and surveillance cameras. After a call with one of his subordinates in his company, Pratt notices some cockroaches in his apartment. Before long, the situation escalates for the worse. The first positive I'll mention is the comic book style that is scattered throughout the film. The style is modelled on 1950s horror comic books, such as Tales from the Crypt. They also appear at the start and end of each story and bookend the film at the end. Next, The Lonesome Death of Jodie Verriel is unique and one of the better stories as it incorporates both horror and comedy very well. Jodie, played by Stephen King, is both intrigued and curious about the extraterrestrial substance that he discovers, without thinking about the potential consequences of touching and disturbing the substance. Although at the start of the story, it shows Jodie's humorous reaction about seeing the meteorite, the story ends with the horror of engaging with foreign materials and not knowing the dangers which they may pose. For me, The Crate, which is another segment written by Stephen King, is the best of the short stories in Creepshow. The story is more complex than the others. It incorporates aspects of horror such as mystery and suspense excellently, and leaves us with a cliffhanger at the end. The segment is also well acted, and certain parts of the story are close to that of King Kong after the creature escapes and the hunt is on to find him. The final positive is how unique the final story, They're Creeping Up on You, is at preying on a fear some people have. Although not all of us are germaphobes such as Upson Pratt in the story, we can all relate to his reaction upon finding that first cockroach in his apartment. The final few scenes as the number of cockroaches multiply and take over his apartment is so effective and concludes the most skin-crawling story of the film by far. The only negative of this film for me is the first story, Father's Day. When I was watching this film for the first time and this story finished, I was very tempted to switch the film off as it was just so daft and silly. However, luckily for me at least, the film substantially improves with the following 4 stories. Although I think the atmospheric shots of the cemetery at night creates an eerie and creepy mood, the story is just not very compelling or scary in the slightest. Creepshow had a budget of $8 million and returned just over $20 million at the box office. The success of this film spawned a sequel, Creepshow 2, in 1987, with George A. Romero involved again with writing the screenplay, and Stephen King involved again as the segments were based on his short stories. The film only featured 3 stories compared to 5 in the original due to budgetary reasons. Although a third instalment was released in 2007, Creepshow 3, this had no involvement with George A. Romero and Stephen King, and received mostly negative reviews. Overall, Creepshow is well worth a watch. Although the first story, Father's Day, is extremely dated and the worst segment in the film by far, the rest of the stories offer a variety of subgenres of horror that work well and make Creepshow an entertaining watch. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.